So anytime you have a sort of literary movement that shifts into another one, there is a dramatic sort of definition of a new style that has to take place. Any literary movement is going to have variation among it, and it's going to have sort of developments and evolution across its time period. But when we have a new sort of big marker in the literary canon, that is a very definite and asserted change in the qualities and characteristics of the literature from that time. So in the modernist era, we have authors who are very interested in defining that style. Modernist manifestos in another text that are a great example of that. And you also have authors that are very much concerned with the style that they're using. William Faulkner, for example, was noted for his very distinct style, which is somewhat confusing in stream of consciousness, very nonlinear in the way that Faulkner writes. And Hemingway and Fitzgerald, who you're reading in this text set, are also noted for their distinct styles. And it's useful to understand those styles to draw the comparisons between that technique and that form. So Hemingway is known for his theory of omission, which he termed iceberg theory. And iceberg theory is the same premise as an iceberg. There's a little bit above the surface, but everything else is hidden beneath. So Hemingway started his writing career as a war reporter, and he wrote in a very sort of plain, direct way, a very objective sort of way, rather than conveying this sort of like overwrought or emotional theme heavy on the page. He just sort of wrote things as they are. Now, Hemingway wrote about this craft and style quite a bit throughout his life, and he believed that this was part of the dignity of a story. He said that, the most important difference between a good story and a not so good story is what you leave out. So Hemingway's omission, his iceberg theory, is very intentional, and you'll see that in all of his work, especially these texts. A Very Short Story is a great example. I mean, it's tiny. Hemingway, as a matter of fact, there's an urban legend that he defined the 6-word story, which is just an example of his economic and sparse style. He also relies on subtext to convey his themes, and he uses very plain language. Most of Hemingway's work is written at about 4th or 5th grade reading level, because he doesn't believe in these sort of rich, developed descriptions to convey his meaning. He uses subtext and iceberg theory. Now, in comparison, you have F. Scott Fitzgerald. F. Scott Fitzgerald is noted for a very different style. He is noted for his very rich, descriptive technique in the way that he conveys symbolism. He's also known for a very ornate or lush use of prose. And both authors have sentences that are, objectively beautiful. However, they use such different techniques that it's a wonderful example of the distinction between the two styles. So as you are reading these texts, you want to think about Hemingway's iceberg theory and how he uses that to convey his subtextual meanings. And you also want to think about F. Scott Fitzgerald and how he conveys his meanings differently. How are his themes and symbolism a different example of these distinct styles in the modernist era? Now, during this era, authors were thinking a lot more intellectually and artistically about style. They were thinking a lot more abstract about the way you convey those things on the page. And these two authors are probably the most well-known. They're two of the big three in the modernist era, but they are a great example of that contrast. Now, a fun fact as you are thinking about that in these texts, Hemingway and Fitzgerald knew each other. They were friends at one point in their life. And later on in their life, their disagreements about style became a very interesting part of their dynamic. They sort of slammed each other's styles and thought the other one was doing it wrong, which is a great example of how modernists and the modernist movement is, a characteristic of these experimental or these moves away from tradition. But there was a lot of debate and diversity about how to move away from that tradition among the authors.